Thank you, Sir George, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for Slough, for bringing forward this really important debate on in-work poverty. I just want to raise a few points around the fact that having a job should bring security and be able for people to raise their families, and yet we are seeing so many more people where being in work is actually leading them to being in work poverty. Yep. Research from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has found that 61% of working age adults in poverty lived in a household where at least one adult was in work, and 11% of all workers lived in a household in poverty. And the poverty rate for part-time workers was double that for full-time workers, 18% compared to 9%, and self-employed workers were twice as likely to be in poverty than employees, 21% compared to 10%. And in-work poverty doesn't affect all groups equally. Rather, ethnic minorities have substantially higher in-work poverty and higher child poverty rates. Yeah. And many ethnic minority groups are more likely to have the types of jobs and working patterns that are associated with in-work poverty. This Conservative government's cost of living crisis has seen a real terms pay fall at its fastest rate since 2001, when records began. And as we're seeing mortgage rates increase and rents rise, millions will be faced with an increased risk of falling into in-work poverty. And I just want to focus on housing. We're seeing around 2 million private rented households, around 38% of the total of those in the private rented sector receiving housing cost support through the universal credit or housing benefit. And yet the government had chose to freeze the local housing allowance rates between 2016 and 20. And while there was a change in 2020, you appreciate in the pandemic, it's been frozen since that time. Yet in Luton South, the Institute for Fiscal Studies analysis shows that there's now a £100 deficit in the local housing allowance rate in comparison with the lowest rents in the area. In fact, we've seen the ONS figures show that the median rent per property paid by tenants in Luton since, an increase since March 2020 to March this year has seen an 8% increase as well. We're also seeing a significant increase in the number of people in a negative budget due to being unable to meet their living costs despite being in work. The causes of negative budgets are complex, but there are fundamentally two reasons: having a low income, being in low paid work, and having high household costs. And in fact, Luton Citizens Advice are seeing increasing numbers of people in negative budget and increasing personal debt and poverty. So I just want to press the Minister to say, ask him to say, what do I say to those families who are working hard, yet struggling to meet their basic living costs? I'm deeply concerned that the lack of action with regards to local housing allowance will see more and more of my Luton South constituents facing evictions as they just simply cannot afford their rent.